everybody. Thanks for coming and braving your day two hangovers combined with the post-lunch food coma. Welcome to Attacking Ajax Web Applications, part of a 17-part series put together by Jeff Moss of Ajax Talks back-to-back. I appreciate being last. Thank you, Jeff, if you're here. Okay, what are we going to talk about? First, we're going to just give you a little introduction about who we are, why you should care about this talk and not leave in the first 10 minutes. We're going to give you a bottom line up front about how Ajax changes web attacking. Then we'll give you a little bit of background on the Ajax technologies, just so you have the understanding so we can go more in depth on some Ajax attacks like discovery and method manipulation, cross-site scripting, and cross-site request forgery. And then we'll go through our observations of some popular Ajax toolkits and how they do under some of these attacks. Okay, who are we? So Zane Lackey and I are consultants for ISEC Partners. We're an application security company headquartered in San Francisco with a sizable office in Seattle. Why do you want to listen to this talk? Anybody who reads the paper or Time or the Register knows that Web 2.0 applications are kind of undergoing a reverse renaissance of security, right? It's the dark age of security for these guys. There's a lot of money chasing a lot of bugs, and if you're not hearing about Yahoo worms or MySpace worms, it's a slow day on the tech section of the USA Today. And so what do we want you to walk away with? We want you to have a basic understanding of Ajax. We want you to know how Ajax changes web attacks from a basic level, have some in-depth knowledge on how a couple of those attacks can actually be taken out. And we want you to form your own opinion about whether you should trust Ajax frameworks to take care of security for you. Not a loaded question at all, right? So we'll move the shameless plug slide all the way to the front so you guys don't run out during the end while we do it. I want to thank Brad, Jesse, and Scott of ISEC Partners, helped do a lot of this work. Amit Klein and Jeremiah Grossman, want to give them shout outs. They do a lot of very good work in web app security. Read some of the papers they've written. And Rich Canning's at Google. Here's our 2 of the 17 books that Himanshu Dwivedi's written in the last 9 months. And you can go get a signed copy if you ask us afterwards. And please send us your resumes. Okay, so Web 2.0, what is it? It's a new honeypot for venture capital, and that's why it's so popular, right? Use the words Web 2.0, India outsource, Flash, social network, maybe throw in a GUI demo that doesn't do anything, and somebody's going to throw $6 million of Series A at you. I highly recommend it. It's a great career path. Works out for that MySpace Tom guy. He's doing okay. But really, Web 2.0 isn't a technology or a group of technologies. It's an attitude. It's kind of a group. It's a set of attributes of these new kind of sites that are coming out that change the way people interact with the web applications, but don't necessarily change the underlying technologies. Some of these new attitudes are things like user-created content is becoming big, or in the case of YouTube, user-pirated content, social networking, and building up social networks where you rate people and you have systems that understand who your friends are. Highly interactive GUIs is one of the big parts and one of the big draws, and mashups and plugins, right? Because if I couldn't get JavaScript from one site, I'd like to get JavaScript from 7 different sites right now. And that's what mashups and plugins are about, and those are becoming actually more and more popular, and we'll talk about those at the end. Not all Web 2.0 sites use new technology. If you look at YouTube or MySpace in WebScarab, which is, anybody here use WebScarab? It's a very excellent web application proxy put out by OWASP, written by a guy named Rogan Dawes, really cool guy. I highly recommend it instead of all the commercial ones. But if you run WebScarab and you run your web browser through it and you open up MySpace, you'll notice that it's actually really boring. There's lots of iframes, there's Flash content to actually do the content stuff. They use divs, they use some HTML forms. Not a lot of real exciting technology in MySpace, but still it's kind of held up as in the pantheon of Web 2.0. Whereas things like Google Maps, MSN Virtual Earth, some of these super high-tech, what are almost experiments by these big companies, use lots and lots of new technology. And so we're trying not to use Web 2.0 too much, and we're going to talk about really Ajax as the umbrella under which all these new technologies fall. Ajax is very controversial for people to use it. One, because everybody fights over who coined it, and second, you can have Ajax with neither JavaScript nor XML. But I'm going to use it because I don't really care about what Tim O'Reilly thinks. It's really an umbrella term for web technologies where rendering is done client-side and communication with the server is asynchronous. Generally, that uses something called the XML HTTP request object, which we'll talk about and where the X comes from, and generally you're using not JavaScript, because that doesn't exist, but this thing called ECMA script, which happens to be the exact same thing as JavaScript, that you'll use ECMA script or JavaScript to do client-side requesting and client-side decisions about how data gets formatted. And that's kind of the umbrella of Ajax, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So some examples. MySpace. Who here has a MySpace page? Let's see it. No, it's okay. Come on, put it up. That doesn't mean you're necessarily a pervert. You just have a 40 or 50% chance. Wow, and they're all like middle-aged white men who raise their hands. That's a little frightening. So MySpace. Why is MySpace in the news all the time, right? Well, I talked about user-created content. This is, when you open up this MySpace page right here, you get lots of HTML and script written by a guy inside of a bear suit, right? That kind of is the issue behind a lot of the Web 2.0 things, is that the model between the people you trust and the people you don't trust has really gone a lot fuzzier, right? When you go to CNN.com, you know that CNN.com made that content, right? When you go to MySpace, I dare you to try to go through the HTML and figure out which div tags came from MySpace and came from somebody in a bear suit, right? But like I said, while MySpace has that kind of attitude, it's not that technologically advanced. And you probably can't read this, but this is just a GET request to get somebody's homepage, that homepage that we just saw. And the response is this huge, unbelievable large chunk of HTML. You know, how many people raised their hand and said they have MySpace pages? This is the same number of people that have seen the MySpace error page, right? Because they throw errors all the time, and it's incredibly slow. And one of the problems is they don't really use Ajax technologies. A good counterexample, as kind of the other end of the technologically advanced Web 2.0, is Google Maps. Google Maps uses dynamic updating. You can see here that there's a page missing that's intentional. That's because it's that's a PNG that hasn't been downloaded yet from the server. You can see the asynchronicity right here in the screenshot, right? And if you look at the Google Maps traffic, what you see is a lot more small requests that come back with much smaller traffic, and something that maybe doesn't even make sense when you first look at it, right? Often when you look at Ajax traffic, it doesn't make any sense unless you look at it in the context of the entire communication. In this case, we have what looks like, what does that look like? Properly formatted what? They're coordinates, but what is this code? It's not HTML, it's JavaScript, right? Now, it's JavaScript without a script tag, it's JavaScript without any definitions of variables, it's JavaScript without context. And that context comes from the Ajax stuff that was already downloaded into the browser. So why should you care about Web 2.0 security? I mean, so far, it's mostly been about bugs and teenage hangout sites. Well, one of the things Web 2.0 represents is a real change in the way people interact with the web. You know, I'm not an old guy, right? But you know, it wasn't too long ago that I was in high school, and when I hung out with my friends online in high school, that made me a dork. It meant, you know, women turned out were not attracted to men whose all their friends were online, or girls, I guess, to boys whose friends were online. And that wasn't too long ago, but my youngest brother is in college right now, and he's an unbelievably cool guy and the big man on campus, and he has an incredibly large MySpace page and spends 80% of his waking hours online. There's been a huge sea change in just our generation of people of what it means to interact with people and how much of that's going to be online. I bet if MySpace had a field to say when you sign up, what's your social security number, mother's maiden name, and parents' bank account routing numbers, that 80% of the kids that sign up would put it in there, right? They have absolutely no fear as to the interaction with it. They don't have that kind of adult trepidation of the computer and the internets and the cyber villain web of all the bad things that can happen. And that's an attitude that is going to expand, and once these kids all become the consumers, it's going to become dominant. It's going to change the way people interact with the web from a security standpoint too. And the technologies, while they're starting with innovative companies, often who are taking venture capital and burning it pretty quickly. Oh, thank you. That makes it a lot easier to give the talk since I can't see now. I appreciate that. They're already moving. These technologies are kind of, there's a trickle-down effect to the more traditional things. We've already seen Ajax in things like financial institutions. We have a healthcare client that's deploying Ajax. The government is deploying Ajax. So what used to just be something that you do as a startup is now real sites that actually are important is using it. And the bugs are affecting people now, right? People are estimating that over 1 million people got adware onto their machine because of the combination of a MySpace cross-site scripting bug and an unpatched an IE 0 day, right? So, you know, how many people in here have teenage kids? Okay, I guess that's basically saying who here is the oldest in the oldest demographic of people that come to BlackHat. So you people that don't want to raise your hands, you should be worrying about these things for sure, because you would be shocked, I think, if you put Ethereal on your network for a day and saw how much information your kids are willing to give to the net. And it's only getting worse. So we're going to do the bottom line, and we're going to talk about how does Ajax change web app attacks. We're going to do this quickly up front just so you guys have an idea of what to think about for the rest of the talk. Okay, how does Ajax change discovery, enumeration, and parameter manipulation? Parameter manipulation being kind of the old standby and still an excellent attack against web applications. And the Web 1.0, and I'm sorry that I'm using these terms, but this is the best way that I can get myself in the paper, is by using terms like Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. In the old Web 1.0, fingerprinting of web applications and application server platforms is a lot of work, right? You have to get an account on your bank site, and you have to use all the functionality, and you've got to walk through it, and you've got to record all the traffic, and actually express all of that and figure out the procedure call mechanism to figure out all the things you can do was a lot of work. In Web 2.0, it a lot of ways becomes a lot simpler. It becomes a lot simpler because a lot of this functionality is now moved to the client, and the client often has lots of information about all the functionality the server can do, right? And so it's just sitting there in the client, and if you can parse it out, it's a lot easier than walking through and spending a couple hours playing with a web app. The bottom line is Ajax enumeration is more complicated because there's not a standard way of Ajax frameworks to store what methods can be called in the server. But in the end, it's a much richer attack surface, and it can make it, with one request, you might be able to get the information on the entire system, kind of like grabbing a WSDL, instead of with many, many requests. Cross-site scripting. In the good old days, we do things like injecting script into HTML text, right? The browser got two things from servers. It got HTML that was generated dynamically, and it got JavaScript that was generated statically. And there's a couple ways you can get script in there. Most of them are pretty well understandable, and it was pretty well understandable how to protect against it. In Web 2.0, now we have dozens of different types of protocols on the wire, and you really need to understand all of them to figure out what is dangerous and what is not. So there's a lot more opportunities for cross-site scripting, but in the end, the cross-site scripting bugs are a lot more complicated. They have to be a lot more customized for the app and for the communication method. And so the good old script alert test is not necessarily going to work. But just because you do that on an Ajax app and you don't get a pop-up box doesn't mean that there's not a vulnerability. Injection attacks. These are the good old attacks against back-end query technologies like SQL, LDAP, XPath, and XQuery. People are still using them. There are some interesting possible new attacks against injection attacks against front-end protocols, but we're not really going to talk about them because I've seen that like in one situation. It's pretty specialized, but if you think about it, you know, you've kind of got a query engine now working in your client, right? If your client is putting together a JSON request in Firefox, then perhaps if somebody has user-controlled data that goes to the server, comes back to you, and that gets put back into that request, that they might be able to do some injection attacks against that, but it's pretty rare. Bottom line, these back-end vulnerabilities are still exist, but there's more fun to be had on the front end. I wouldn't say there's a big change with injection attacks for Ajax. Cross-site request forgery. We'll talk about this in detail. In the good old days, cross-site request forgery, in the good old days of cross-site request forgery being 6 months ago, right? We're not talking about 1999. It was a big issue. And in Ajax, it's an even bigger issue. And it's more complex, it's harder to find, it's harder to understand, but in certain situations, it's much, much worse than you were able to do in the good old days. And we'll talk about this a lot. Okay, so Zane, you want to give a little background on Ajax?
All right, let's take a look at the Ajax history. Before everyone started doing Ajax,